The first one we're going to do is 7 minus 3 square root of x plus 3, and that equals 1. Okay, 7 minus 3 square root of x plus 3 equals 1. The first thing you're always going to do on this is isolate the radical, which means isolate, we need to get it by itself. If you're isolating, like if you're in self-isolation or whatever, you're isolating one piece from everything else. So we need to isolate that radical from everything else. So I need to get this radical on one side of the equal sign and everything else on the other side of the equal sign. So if it helps, you can draw a line down this so that it's very clear, like, oh, one side versus the other. And then we just need to use our basic algebra skills to get this by itself. So I'm just going to subtract the 7 first. So you, on the left, these cancel out, and I'm left with negative 3 square root of x plus 3, and that equals 1 minus 7 is negative 6. Okay, now for this piece right here, if these two things are right next to each other, that means that they are being multiplied. We're technically multiplying that negative 3 to the square root of x plus 3. I didn't mean to do that. So to get rid of multiplication, you use division. So we're just going to divide by that negative 3. Right here is where I see a lot of mistakes solving these. A lot of times you'll think to add that 3 over. If it is right next to something in math, if they're right next to something, you can always put a multiplication sign between those. So then those are gone. We're left with the square root of x plus 3. That equals negative 6 divided by negative 3 is positive 2. Okay, any questions at all to that point in this? Okay, once you have the radical isolated, to get rid of a square root, you square it. So we are just going to square both sides. That radical is isolated, so now we're just going to square both sides, because if we square this side, the square root is gone. And if we square this side, that number just gets a little bit bigger. Okay, so if you square a square root, these basically just cancel each other out. So you're just left with x plus 3. And 2 squared is 4. And now you're left with a pretty simple equation to solve. You could just subtract the 3, and you get x equals positive 1. Any questions with how we got to the answer right there? Okay, with these radical equations, since we're doing this step right here where you square both sides, we have the potential to bring in answers that aren't really answers. So we always need to double check our answers. And to do that, you're just going to plug them back in. So plug back in. Okay, you always have to double check your answers. So I'm going to take this 1 and I am going to plug it in to this equation up here. And this is going to be 7 minus 3 square root. Wherever there's an x, I'm going to put a 1 plus 3. And I want to know, does that equal, so I'm just going to put a little question mark above it. Does that equal positive 1? Okay. Now, if you have a calculator, I don't know if you can see my face, but if you have a calculator, I would just take this equation right here, plug that directly into the calculator exactly like it looks. So you would do 7 minus 3 square root of 1 plus 3, and you do end up getting 1. If you don't have a calculator, you want to do it by hand, that's also fine. I'll do it by hand right now. So we have 7 minus 3. 1 plus 3 is 4. And then just keep simplifying. 7 minus 3 square root of 4 is 2. Order of operations tells us that we have to multiply this first. So this is going to be 7 minus 6, which does equal 1. Okay, which means that our answer holds, and we do have x equals 1. I will go through one where it doesn't work, and so we can see what that looks like. Is there any questions with that one? Okay, you're going to see 4 different types of radical equations. This one was a radical equals a number. And it's not super important that you know like what type it is, but I'll just kind of briefly talk. So this one was like a radical equals a number because once we got here, we had our radical just equaled some number. Okay, this next type that we're going to do is going to be a radical equals a radical. So that means we're just going to have radicals on both sides of the equal sign. So if we have the square root of x minus 5, and that equals the square root of 23 minus x. We have radicals on both sides of this equation. The first step would have been to isolate, but they're already isolated, so we don't have to worry about that. The second step would be to square both sides. So that means I'm just going to square this side, and I'm going to square this side. When there's radical on both sides, honestly, like this is one of the easier types of equations because you square both sides, which means that that cancels and I'm just left with x minus 5 on the left. Same thing here, the square cancels that and I'm left with 23 minus x on the right. And then this should be an equation that we can solve pretty easy. I'll add this x over. You get 2x minus 5 equals 23. Add the 5. You get 2x equals 28. Divide by 2. So x equals 14. Okay. Any questions on that? Once we've solved it, you always need to go back and double check. That's a good thing to do anytime you're like working on math problems is to just double check your answers, especially if it's a solving one. You can just always just take the whatever you get, check answers, and just plug them in where the x's are. So then this is going to be the square root of 14 minus 5. And I want to know, does that equal the square root of 23 minus 14? Again, you could just put this into your calculator. You could just put this into your calculator. See if you get the same thing for both of those. Or we could just do it by hand. 14 minus 5 is 9, which the square root of 9 is 3. Over here, 23 minus 14 is 9, which square root of 9 equals the square root of 9. So 3 does equal 3, which means that our answer holds true. Okay, any questions with that one? Okay. 2 more. So let's do, this next one is going to be a radical equals a variable. So if we have something like the square root of 42 minus x, and that equals x. The first thing, isolate, which is already done. A lot of these will already be isolated for you, but always check if we need to isolate. This one we don't need to. So that's done for us. And then we're going to square both sides. So I am going to square this side, and I'm going to square this side. Okay, the left side's easy. Again, just cancels. So I'm left with 42 minus x. And then right side, x squared is just x squared. Okay. Now at this point right here, we have so we have an x squared term, we have an x term, and we have a constant. Which means whenever you have an x squared term specifically, like if you see an x squared term, this should be like a red flag that we are going to have to solve this by factoring. Okay, I keep telling you guys, factoring never ever goes away. If you struggle with factoring, you need to come get help. I can send you worksheets. I can, whatever I need to do to make sure that we get factoring done. It never goes away. Okay. So we have to solve this by factoring, which means that we need to get it set equal to 0. So I'm just going to, I want my x to be positive. So I want to leave it on the right side of this because it gets all funky and weird if it's not. So I'm going to subtract the 42 over to this side, and I'm going to add the x over to this side. So I end up with 0 equals x squared, and I'm just going to put this in standard form. So plus x minus 42. Okay, any questions with that? Okay, now to solve this, we're just going to factor it. We want to see what multiplies to be negative 42, adds to be 1, which happens to be 7 and negative 6. So this is going to be 0 equals x plus 7, x minus 6. Which means we have 2 potential answers here. We're going to set this one equal to 0, and we're going to set this one equal to 0. So this is going to be x plus 7 equals 0. Subtract the 7, you get x equals negative 7. Here we get x minus 6 equals 0, and we have x equals positive 6 because you would add that 6 over. So here's our potential answers, but we need to plug them back in and see. And one hint here, this one right here, this negative 7, is probably not going to work. Because when you're taking a square root, you can never get a negative out of a square root. So most of the time, if you end up with a negative answer, it's probably not going to work. Now, that's not always the case. Like there is sometimes that you will end up with a negative, but especially if there's 2 answers here, be more wary of your negative answers. Okay, and let's double check these, and we'll see which one of these works. So I'm going to check the negative 7 first. So I'm going to have the square root of 42 minus negative 7. And I want to know, does that equal negative 7? And you could plug this into your calculator if you want. You could just plug that left side in. Or we could do this by hand. So that's going to be the square root of 42. When you subtract a negative, it's the same as adding, which is the square root of 49. Now, when we are just simplifying square roots, you always assume the positive. You always assume the positive, and if we're solving, that's when you do the plus or minus. But since we're just assuming the positive here, like if you plug this into the calculator always assumes the positive, and you will get a positive 7. Okay, so this is positive 7. We're saying equals negative 7. It's close, but it does not work. Positive 7 does not equal negative 7, which means that this answer right here is not actually one of our answers. Okay. We're going to do the same thing, and we are going to check the 6. So this is going to be the square root of 42 minus 6, and we want to know, does that equal 6? Put parentheses around that. Which 42 minus 6, that is 36, which the square root of 36 is 6. And 6 does equal 6. So we are good. So that means our answer is x equals 6, and this x equals negative 7 does not work. Is there any questions on that? We're okay with that. Okay, we're just going to do one more. Let's do, this one's a radical equals a binomial. So if we have, let's see, negative v plus the square root of 2v minus 3, and I want to know, does that equal negative 1? Or I want to solve this for negative 1. The first thing we need to do here is isolate it, which this one is not isolated, so I'm going to add the v over. And I get the square root of 2v minus 3 equals v minus 1. Here's our binomial part. This v minus 1 is a binomial. Now, once we've isolated it, the radical is now isolated. I am going to square both sides. So I'm going to square this, and I am going to square that binomial. Left side of this, pretty easy. This just cancels, and I'm left with 2v minus 3. That equals, now the right side of this is the same as v minus 1 times v minus 1. Now this, you either have to multiply this out using the box, or you have to do distribution here. So this is either the box or distribution. Okay, you can't just square the x or the v and the negative 1. You have to use the box or you have to use distribution here. So we have, I'm just going to use the box. So we have v minus 1 times v minus 1, which you get v squared, negative v, positive 1. Left side was easy. We're just going to leave that as 2v minus 3. The right side, when we combine this, we have the v squared. Those negative v's combine together to be negative 2v, and then we have plus 1. Again, we're seeing this. We have the v squared, we have our v's, and we have our constants. which the v squared is our dead giveaway that we're going to have to solve this by factoring. So I'm just going to move everything to one side. I'm going to subtract this 2v over to this side, and I'm going to add the 3. And we get 0 equals v squared, negative 2v minus 2v is negative 4v. 1 plus 3 is 4. Factor this, so we're seeing what multiplies to be 4, adds to be negative 4. It's negative 2 and negative 2. So we have 0 equals v minus 2 and v minus 2. Which, since those are the same exact thing, we're only going to end up with one answer here. So we're going to have v minus 2 equals 0, which means v equals positive 2. And it's the same for that one. Any questions with how we got that? Okay. Then the last thing we have to do is check. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to plug it back into the top. So we have negative 2 plus the square root of 2 times 2 minus 3. And we want to know, does that equal negative 1? You can take this, just plug it right into your calculator. Okay, it will give you exactly what it equals. We can do it by hand too, which I'll just do it by hand so we can see. So that's negative 2 plus 2 times 2 is 4 minus 3, which that's negative 2 plus 4 minus 3 is 1. The square root of 1 is 1, so this is negative 2 plus 1, which is negative 1. So those do equal each other, which means this is our answer to this. Okay, any questions at all with that? Okay, so next week, regardless of if we're in person or if we're at home, there will be a review on Monday and there will be a test on Wednesday. Now, I should know by tomorrow whether we're in person or if we're still online. As soon as I know, I will let you guys know. Okay, just plan on review/test next week, possibly online, possibly in person, depending on what happens with what they decide, whether we're going back in person or not. Okay, is there any questions with that? Okay, so next week is a review and test. Next Friday is December 4th. I can't even believe it. It's so crazy. But next Friday is December 4th. This is the day that all late work is due. So everything that we have done up to this point is due December 4th. And this is a hard deadline. I will not accept things after this. Okay, if you come ask me, I'm just going to tell you, no, all late work is due on December 4th, including the Unit 4 test. If you have not taken the Unit 4 test yet, you need to send me an email. I am at school today and tomorrow. You're welcome to come in and take it here. But you need to send me an email. We need to get that taken. If that is not taken by December 4th, you will just get a 0 in the gradebook. Okay, that has to be taken by December 4th. You need to contact me so that we can figure out how this is going to be taken. Okay, you are allowed to come into the school and take it in my classroom. So if that's what we need to do, let's do that. Okay, any questions regarding any of that stuff? All right, that's all I had for you guys then. Put your name, make sure you put your name into the chat so that I can make sure I give you guys attendance for today. Get this assignment done and have a good break. Wear your masks, please.
Poor Gagan. She's thank you, Miss Gagan.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Gagan. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you.